Baruch Hashem. Boker Tov. Good morning, everybody. Today's daf yomi is
Good
Makkos
morning.
daf Chaf. Good morning, good morning. Today's daf is Makkos daf Chaf, Makkos 20. We're going to start on the bottom of 19b at the third wide line. The Gemara says, Amar of Atzi, Amar of today's daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. And says Tzara. Amar Avasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Meiser Sheni me'imasa chayavin alav. At what point are you liable for eating the Meiser Sheni? The question relates to when you take the Meiser Sheni until you have a positive commandment to eat it in Jerusalem, but the negative commandment against eating it outside Jerusalem takes effect once it's brought into Jerusalem. So at what point does that prohibition take effect? Mishara Pnei Choma, once it goes within the walls, my time of Jerusalem, my time. The Amar Kra, it's based upon the fact the verse says, Pnei Hashem Okecha Tochenu. One verse says you shall eat it before God, and then another verse says, Ksiv Lo Tuchal Echol B'Sharecha, you can't eat it in your gates. Wherever it says you should read it before Hashem, wherever we say you shall eat it before God, we also apply you should not eat it in your gates. And wherever we don't say the application in the verse, you shall eat it, you before Hashem you shall eat it. We don't apply the prohibition. So that's how we know the prohibition applies once it's already come into the temple. So Rabbi Yossi challenges his position of Rabbi Yochanan. So Meisvei, the Gemara challenges this from a brayso of Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi Omer Kohen shall also be other te'ena shel teva. Let's say a Kohen has a fig that was untied, and Amar te'eno zu trumasa ba'ukta, and he says this fig, the truma is on its stem, and the ma'aser rishon b'tzafona, and the tithe for the Levite is on the northern part of the fig. U'ma'aser sheni ladroma, and the tithe for the ma'aser sheni is on the southern part of the fig. Mishnas ma'aser sheni, who the be Yerushalayim, and it's the year of the ma'aser sheni, and he's in Jerusalem. U'ma'aser ani v'hu b'gvulin. Or if it's the Meiser Ani, which is the third year or the sixth year, and the tithe to the poor, and he's outside of Jerusalem, Loka and Achla, and he eats it, Loka Achas. He's going to get one set of lashes. Why one? Because the reason why he gets why is he getting it? Because even though he took all these tithes, he has not yet taken the tithe for Trumas Meiser. And the Trumas Meiser is after you take Meiser, then the Levite has to separate, and you give it to the Levite has to separate offering to the Kohen. So since he has not yet separated that tithe, therefore he's violating the prohibition of Tevel. V'zar sha'achla lo keshtayim. But if he's a non-Kohen who eats it, he's going to get who eats this fig that was not separate Trumas Meiser. He's going to get two sets of lashes, one for eating the Trumas Meiser and one for not separating the Trumas Meiser. So one for eating the Truma, and another one for not separating the Trumas Meiser. Have a good day, Benji. Take care. God willing, God willing. What? A Kohen also, it's a very good point, Jeff is making that there's even though the Kohen's allowed to eat it, he also has to separate the Truma. So that's the point. So and in this case it was the Trumas Meiser, the Truma to the Kohen. So no, he gave the Levi gets the Meiser, and the Levi has to separate the Trumas to the Kohen, the Trumas Meiser. Because even though he's a Kohen and it's going to him, it has to be separated. So it has to be separated. You can't eat it if it wasn't separated. So it was tevel.
Ladies separation from himself.
Yeah, it had to have been separated. Yeah. So that's the idea. Okay. So you have to, since he ate food that was not yet separated for Trumas Meiser, And the Kohen gets one set of lashes because it's Tevel, and the non-Kohen gets two for eating the Truma. So She'ilu B'tchila Acha, but if he had eaten it at the outset, meaning to say before all these separations, Eino Loke El Achas, he would only get one set of lashes because of eating Tevel. But now that he separated a portion of them and not all of them, he's going to get two sets of lashes, one for eating the Truma and one for eating the Tevel. Anyway, that's the Brisa. So how is this a question? So what's the reason why he gets two sets of lashes? Because he was still in Jerusalem when they did the separation. But if he was outside of Jerusalem, he would get three sets of lashes, one for eating Meiser Sheni outside Jerusalem. And don't we say the Afagav de Lav Roa Pnei Choma? So isn't it the case, even though it didn't see Jerusalem yet, it didn't go in, and he's still going to be getting a prohibition for violating the Meiser Sheni? Eating it outside Jerusalem. So it's a question on Rabbi Yochanan's law. Gemara says, no, the Eili, the Afti. No, he brought it in and then brought it out. And that's why he would have gotten the third set of lashes. Well, Gemara says, well, Yahachi, Ma'il Meimer, what's the Chiddush? There always has to be a Chiddush in the teaching. So Gemara says, no, Hacha by Eskina, and what we're talking about in cases could go in the Eilinu B'tivlainu. He brought it into Jerusalem in its state where it was untithed, because Savar Matano Shlo Hormo Kamisha Hormo Damyan. And the position is that even though the tithe was not yet separated, it's as though it was separated. Look at Rashi. He brought this fig into Jerusalem while it was still in its untithed state. That the walls absorbed this produce for the Meiser Sheni that was in the future going to be tithed from it. So that's how the prohibition came about. Because these other position that the gifts to the Kohen or the gifts that were not yet tithed, we view them as though they were tithed. The dummy, Rashi says, and it says, though commanda ayal meiser sheni be'eni. It says, though he brought actual meiser sheni in, even though it was not yet meiser sheni, since it was potential meiser sheni, we view it as though it was meiser sheni, because he saw the walls of Jerusalem, and so therefore, when he takes it out, he gets the lashes, and so it's as though it's like it could go in the afke nami betivwa. So that's what the case here. Because Savar Matana Shol Hormo Kamisha Hormir Daman. So the Gemara says, can Rabbi Yossi really hold that position? And Savar Rabbi Yossi Matana Shol Hormo Kamisha Hormir Dami? Is that really possible? Vatanya Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yossi Onechaku Beishama Beisilel Al Perashol Nigmro Melachtan Va'avu Berushalayim Sheipadem Meiser Sheni Shalem V'Yochol B'Kol Makom. So he says, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yossi that Beishama and Beisilel, who are when they argue, we'll see their argument in a few moments, they don't argue about fruits. They don't argue about fruits that were not yet tithed. Like, for example, that they were Shenigmar Malachta means that they went through the process where they're supposed to be tithed. Rashi says that they're ready to be, that they complete all their work and now they're ready to be tithed. As it states in Zrayim, when is the completion of their work? And so therefore the obligation to tithe takes effect. By wheat, when you smooth out the bushel. And by gourds at a certain point. So anyway, they're not arguing. So we back to our Gemara. It says, and they don't argue about fruits that were not yet completed their work for Abu Yerushalayim, and they passed through Jerusalem. That you can redeem their Meiser Sheni v'yochel b'kol makom, because once it has gone through Jerusalem, you can't redeem it. But since these fruits were not yet completed from their work, you can redeem it. But Shammai and Beisil both agree with that. So what are they only arguing about? Al perish in nigmar malachim, fruits that were completed in their work. Va'avru b'Yerushalayim, and they passed through Jerusalem. Shabbat Shammai omrim yachzir meiser sheni shalem v'yochel b'Yerushalayim. Beit Shammai says that you can redeem basically them and go and eat yachzir meiser sheni shalem. That you can't redeem them. You have to bring it back to Jerusalem and eat it there, because once it passed through Jerusalem, Beisil omrim yipadeh. Basil says you can redeem them and eat them wherever you want. So they only argue about a circumstance where it was completed in its work. That's where Basil says you can redeem it, and Beis Shammai says you can. But if it is not yet completed in its work, everybody says that you could still redeem it. And if you're going to say that even though there wasn't tithe yet, we view it as though it was going to be tithe potentially, why couldn't you redeem it once it goes through the walls of Jerusalem? And so Rabbi Yossi agrees that nobody says you can redeem it under those circumstances. But that he said, if Rabbi Yossi says everybody agrees you can redeem it. So why would you say he says that you can't redeem it? So Amarabba Rava says, Mechitza le'achol deraisa. Mechitza le'akot derabanan. He says the idea that you have to eat the Meiser Sheni once basically in the walls of Jerusalem. Mechitza le'achol, that this law that if once it enters in, you have to you can't eat it outside of Jerusalem, and that's a prohibition lav. And so therefore that is the biblical law. But mechitza liklot, but the idea that if it Meiser enters in Jerusalem, you can never take them out and redeem it, that is rabbinic. When it is there, when it's in Jerusalem after it was separated. But the tithe, but betivle lo gazer rabbanan. But once it was untithe status, they didn't make this decree anymore. Ravina gives a different explanation, goes back to the discussion we had in the end of yesterday's daf, to go to Nakale Bekanya. No, we're talking about a case where he brought it into Jerusalem, but the fruit never entered in, but he was in Jerusalem, and it's attached to a stick. So that Vativ Shobai Rav Papa. Remember, Rav Papa asked, is that going to, can he redeem it outside Jerusalem if it was attached to a stick? And the Gemara, well, he was in, but it was attached to a stick, which was outside Jerusalem. And the Gemara didn't answer that question. So, but from here, we now can answer his question that under those circumstances, the Meiser, we consider it as though it's in Jerusalem. And just like now you're liable for eating it outside of Jerusalem as though it went in, so too you can't redeem it like all Meiser that enters into Jerusalem. Okay, so that's a technical point. And now that we've established that, the Gemara goes on to, ironically, a completely different topic, because we're dealing with things that get lashes. So it's just like a tractate here at the end. This last chapter is like a catch-all of different prohibitions. So now we're dealing with the prohibition of, yeah. Well, he's saying everybody agrees. He doesn't opine on the opinion of the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but he says everybody agrees that if it went in and it was not yet completed for its work, you could redeem it. But that seems to be at odds with the position he had said earlier, Matana Shel Hormu Misha Hormu Damian. So therefore, he's not consistent with either one, even the leading position of Beis Hillel. And therefore, we have to say that there's a distinction between whether or not you can redeem it and whether or not you have to eat it in Jerusalem. So the Gemara says, okay, let's say you make a bald spot on your head. There's a prohibition from the Torah of making, we'll see, several prohibitions, bald spots. So somebody makes a bald spot on their head, or somebody, so the making the bald spot is in response to a dead person. Somebody, one of their dead relatives, so you make a bald spot. Makuf pa'as rosho. And somebody who rounds out the corners of his head. And somebody who destroys the corners of his beard. Or somebody who makes one mark for the dead. He makes a mark or scratch on his body in response to a dead relative, chayiv. He's going to be liable for a set of lashes. Let's say he makes one mark for 5 dead, or 5 marks for 1 dead. He's liable for each and every one. He's liable for 5. And now we're talking about the if you round out the head, ala rosh shtayim. If you make a bald spot on your head, where is the mark? That's a problem. Achas mikan va'achas mikan. one on either side. Ala srita, excuse me. Ala zakayin shtayim mikan shtayim mikan ma'achas mechmata. But for the beard, it's two on either side and one in the middle. Rabbi Lezer Omer im nitlu kulan ka'achas eino chayav achas. Rabbi Lezer says if you remove all the hairs of your beard at once, you're only liable once. The eino chayav ad shitlanu b'tar. You're only liable if you remove them with a razor. And Rabbi Lezer Omer Afil Lakto b'Malaket u'Beritani Chayav. Even if you use a different tool, it's not usually used for cutting hair, like some sort of carpentry tool, like a plane, you're going to be liable. So Tanu Rabbanan, the Brisa says, well, Yikrachu, you're not allowed to make a bald spot. It says in the verse, Yikrachu karcha b'rosham u'paslikanam lo yigolechu viv saram lo yisratu sarates. So what does this mean? I might think even if you make 4 or 5 bald spots, you're only liable once. A bald spot. I'll call karcha. Then you're liable for each and every bald spot. So then it says birosham. Why does it say birosham? Ma ta'amalom, or why does it say birosham? Lefi. So why does it say birosham? So matam fishanema lo tiskodu lo tisimu karcha beinenechem wameis. It says you can't make a mark, you can't put a bald spot between your eyes for the dead body. Yachol lo yechayev elal beinanayim bovad. I might think you're only liable for between the eyes. Minayin larabos ko arosh. How do I know anywhere on the head you're liable? Tamom or birosham. Rabos kol arosh, to include anywhere on the head. Ve'inli ela bekohanim, because this is coming from Parshas Emor, which is talking about the kohanim. And sheribo be'anakos of mitzvos yiseros. I might think that this prohibition only applies to making a bald spot in response to a dead, only applies to the kohanim who have extra mitzvos. Yisrael minay, and how do I know if it also applies to regular Israelite? Nemer kan korcha, v'nemer la'alon korcha. It says here a bald spot, and it says la'alon korcha. It says over here, korcha, and also by Kohanim it says korcha. So by Yisrael it says korcha, by Kohanim, ma'alawan, just like by the Kohanim, chayav al korcha v'korcha, just like by the Kohanim, reliable for every bald spot, chayav al rosh k'bein anayim, and also anywhere in the head, like between the eyes. Afkan chayav al korcha v'korcha chayav al rosh k'bein anayim. Okay, umalawan al mace, and just like by the Kohanim, it's by the dead. Afkan al mace. Also, for the Israelite, it's in response to a death, well, a death of a relative. So Gemara says, "Hani dalad vehei krichos hechidami." How can you ever have a circumstance? What's our Mishnah talking about? The Brisa talking about where you're going to get lashes for each and every one of these 4 or 5 bald spots. If you want to say that you made 5 separate bald spots, and each time before you did it, you were given a warning. Well, Pshita, well, it's obviously the case you're going to get lashes for each and every one. These are 5 distinct acts. And if you want to say we're on the top of 20b, if you want to say it's with 1 warning, mi mechayev. Who says you're liable under those circumstances for 5 times if you only get 1 warning? But Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, in Kiddushin and in Nazir, Nazir Shaya Shota Yain Kol Yom. What's it? Is a Nazirite drinking wine and drinking it all day. He's not allowed to drink wine. Eino chayav alachas. He's only going to get 1 set of lashes if it's 1 warning and he keeps drinking it. Amr lo al tishta hu shota. But let's say they keep warning him not to drink. Then chayav kol achas v'achas. Then he's going to get lashes for each and every time he drinks. So what's the case here where you get 4 or 5 sets of lashes? Gemara says no. He puts this like depilatory cream, which removes the hair. He puts it on each of his fingers, and then hold on 1 second. So he puts it on each of the fingers. So he puts it on each of the fingers at once. So he's like he's doing 5 separate actions. Okay, imagine if they charge you when you got a haircut like that for washing your hair too, and they charge you for each of the fingers. But that's Yeah.
So exactly when you did it one after the other, you only do one. So you did one, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Those are some of the things that
Say this again.
it says that you line up for five because you did it all at once.
Right.
And you just simultaneously the whole.
Right.
If you get a warning, and then no more warning, but then
Right. Well, that would be similar. It's a very good point just making, but that would be similar to the case where you drink the wine all the day after one warning. But here you do. Right. Presumably not. That's a good point. Mikama Shira Karcha. So what's the next question? What is the amount of the bald spot that you're liable for? Ravuna Amar Kadesha Yeremi Rosho. It's just to see it to be seen on his head. Rabbi Yochanan Mishum, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says kigris. He says it's the size of a bean. Acherim in the third position, Kadesha Yeremi Rosho. Acherim say to be seen from his head. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chavivi Puigiba Tuasa tonight. He says actually three Tanaim argue about this. Chad Omer, one says Kedei Sheyira Mirosho, one says to be seen from his head. V'chad Omer Kishtei Syros, one says like two hairs. So we see one is a gris, one is to be seen from its head, and one is to see from two hairs. So there's a third position. So what's the amount of what the bald spot that you're liable for? One is anything visible, one is two hairs, and one is the size of a bean. Mika demapik shtei syros umayol b'kadash. And there are some who say that you don't count the two hairs as the shear, but instead you count the lentil, which is smaller than a bean. V'simanech b'hares kegris umnichya kadasha. The way to remember this is from our parasha from this week, which is the Zir Mitzorah, that a baharis, the mark of a baharis, is the size of a bean. Umichya, the size inside the baharis, which is the size of a tzaras, is the size of a lentil. Tana nota malopi azug b'shabbat. That's somebody who removes the fullness of the scissors. I don't know how they translate that, but like a scissor cut. How do they translate that, Jeff?
scissors.
A scissors what?
A scissors tip.
Tipful, yeah, like a cut of the scissor. If you remove that amount of hair on Shabbos, you're going to be liable for a sin offering. Like, so how much is that amount? It's two hairs. But the bride says shtayim. But it can't be that it's two hairs, because the next piece of the brisa says the next piece of the brisa has that a bald spot is two. And if it would be and it seems like the bald spot is arguing with the hairs for Shabbos. So therefore it doesn't make sense that the hairs for Shabbos is also two hairs. So therefore that's a Vatayin Lakarchashem. So Ema V'chein Lakarchashem. Okay, so change the text. There's also a bald spot is two. If you remove a tipful of hair on Shabbos with the scissors, you're liable. The kama moopi azug, how much is that? Shtaim is two. Rabbi Eliezer Omer achas. It's even one hair. Modim chachamim lo Rabbi Eliezer b'moaki levanos mitoch shcharos afilu achas shuchayev. Rabbi Eliezer admits, the chachamim admit to Rabbi Eliezer that if you're taking out the white hairs from the black hairs, if you're a man and you're taking out your white hairs on Shabbos, even one hair you're going to be liable. So even during the week, a man can't remove one gray hair because that's clear. So on Shabbos it shows that that it's significant amount because you're just removing a gray hair. So even one hair is enough. And even during the week, it's going to be you're liable because a man is not allowed to dress like a woman. So that's actually, I don't think something that people are as careful about today. Not everybody is so careful about that because nowadays this prohibition of dressing like a man or dressing like a woman, that's societal. So nowadays, many people, many men are doing this it's not necessarily assumed to be women's garments. It's just the way men dress. Although I think some men would make more money if they had gray hair because people would think that they're more wise. Okay, that's what I tell myself as I get the gray hair. As Amakif Pa'at Rosho, one who shaves off the corners of his head is going to have to do lashes. Tanarabanan Pa'as Rosho. What does it mean when it says the corners of his head? Sof Rosho, the end of his head. Ezu Sof Rosho. What does that mean, the end of his head? Da mashvet tzedav va'achorei ozno upatchato. Somebody who basically evens out the temples from behind his ears and his forehead. Like it seems like you make like a mark around. I mean, it's not 100% clear what this is, but he makes it. He cuts off like this whole part of his hair. This whole part, he cuts it off. Tani Tana Kamedu Avchista, Echad Makif, Echad Nikaf. Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll see how he does it. Echad Makif, Echad Nikaf. Okay. The one who does the makif, the one who cuts it, and the one who's cut gets the lashes. Amroi man the achel tamri ba'arboy lucky. The one who eats dates in a basket is getting lashes. Meaning to say the guy who was shaved, what did he do wrong? So the Gemara gives three answers to this. First of all, the Amr Chamani Rabbi Yehuda he. This is the position of Rabbi Yehuda who says, "Lav sheim humaisa lo kanolav." Even though you didn't do an action, you get a prohibition without an action, you get lashes. Rava says the makif la'atzmo. No, Rava says we're talking about a person who shaved himself, so he's going to be in violation of two sets of lashes: one for shaving, one for being shaved. And then the divrei akol and Rav Ashi Amar b'misayeh the divrei akol. Rav Ashi gives a third position that is b'misayeh. He helps the person do it, meaning to say, and that follows the position that since he's doing an action, let's say he raises his hair so that the person can cut them. That's considered to be Messiah over Avera, and so therefore it's considered to be like an action, so therefore he's liable. So Ramash's pass is the kano, and we'll get back to Jeff's question in a moment. One who is mashchas paas zekano, one who is destroying the corners of his beard. Tanarabanan paas zekano is sof zekano. The corners of the beard is the end of his beard. Ve'edu sof zekano. What is the end of his beard? Shiboas zikno. I guess the shiboas is usually like the stalks of his beard, meaning to say all the places that were listed in the Mishnah. I'm not sure how do they translate the word shiboas there? Anyway. Yeah, that's what it literally means. So it means like the which is the parts listed in the Mishnah, the two corners and the middle, the two corners on each side and then the middle. Masari tzrita achas. If you make one mark for the dead, you're liable. Tan rabbanan v'seret nefesh nu v'sarchem. You should not make a mark for a soul on your flesh. Yachal afilu seret al beiso shenafel. I might think you're even liable if it is a mark for your house that fell down, or your ship sank, Tamalomar, nefesh. It's only for a dead body. You're only liable for a dead body. How do I know if you make 5 marks for a dead body? Meaning to say, like he applied the cream with his 5 fingers. Let's say he made like with his fingers, he marked it on his head, and then he scratched his face with 5 fingers at the same time. He's going to be liable for each one. Tamomer v'seret l'chayva kol srita v'srita. Rabbi Yossi Omer Minayel Mesarit Srita Achas Achamish Meisem Shachayva kol achas v'achas. Also the alternative. You have 5 dead relatives, and then you make 1 mark, you're going to be liable for each one. Tamal Omer lenefesh l'chayv kol nefesh v'nefesh. Mar says, but how can you use that? Didn't we already do this for his house that fell, or to exclude the case of the house that fell, or if the ship sank in the sea? So meaning to say they're both one prohibition. Ksiv hasam, and by let's go to do it says lamis. And from there we learn that only if you're dead you're liable, and so that's how he excludes it. Amar Shmuel, hamasarit bekli chayiv, that if you make this mark with a utensil, you're liable for 2, because masarit and megaded. Our challenge is meisvei srito gedida achasi. Don't we say it's 1? Ela shesrita biyad ugdida bekli. So it says that srita is with the hand and gedida is bekli. So why Shmuel say you're liable twice? Huda Amak Rabbi Yossi. He holds like Rabbi Yossi, who says that srita and gedida are one. Tana Kamed Rabbi Yochanan Ames Bein biyad Bein bekli chayev. For a dead body, whether you do it with a hand or with utensil, you're liable. But alavodas kochavim. But if you do it for idolatry to worship it, biyad chayev bekli pater. Only with a hand are you liable, but this was a way of worshiping the idolatry to make the marks on themselves. Mar says, "Vayipchuksiv," but didn't say "Vayiskozdu kamishpatam b'charavos v'ramachim." Doesn't it say in the verse in Malachim that they made the marks with the swords and the spears? Okay, so this is today's daf. So reverse it, that for the idolater, you're liable only for with a utensil. Let's go back to Jeff's question. Jeff was talking about the